Ah, what's up, fellas? Welcome back to the channel. A couple of videos back, I made something where I shared my thoughts and experiences on the DJI HD FPV system. And while I'm absolutely sold that HD is definitely the way to go, what I have not been able to comment on was how that system has worked for me in a professional environment, in a professional setting. And what I mean by that is just like being on productions, being on set. And the only reason for that is because of this freaking pandemic. The production industry has just really slowed down. But fortunately, I've had a couple of gigs, which, by the way, if anyone out there needs a dope FPV pilot with that eye, call me. But I just got back from New York on a music video gig, and that would have been my third time using the FPV system. And so I feel like, I'm a little bit more qualified now. I feel like I'm ready to share my thoughts and experiences with you guys. So that's what I want to go over with you guys today in this video. And because I need to unpack my gear right now, I might as well also show you my setup, the gear that I use to basically level up my production game. Alright, so first of all, if you haven't seen my video about my experiences with DJI, you should go check that out. But to make the long story short, it is good, man. It really changes the way that you fly. And a good example of that is this flight that I did flying through this Ferris wheel using this guy right here. Now, if this were analog, there's just no way that I would have been able to comfortably fly this line, let alone even see it, just because it's a metal cage and there's probably be a lot of signal bouncing around to make a really dirty feed. But even if the signal was clear, like, the resolution just wouldn't have been there to be able to see. So while all this was fine and great for freestyle, I couldn't use this setup on professional settings because normally on the bigger productions there's a requirement to be able to send your feed to what is sometimes called a VTR, or sometimes they call it Video Village. And really their job is to take everybody's camera feed and play it back to the client, the director, and really anybody else that needs to weigh in on the shot. This is pretty much how they give you feedback on the shot, how to change it up, or even to just call the shot good. And it wasn't until I got this guy. Guys, this is like the missing link that was gonna let me start using the DJI system in professional settings, is this. This is the DJI Smart Controller, and what this has allowed me to do is basically provide this feed to Video Village. And the way it works is really simple. You take your DJI goggles, you connect the USB-C here, connect that into this USB port here, and then now this becomes an external monitor that a director or somebody can watch. You've got this HDMI port here that then sends that feed out to everybody else that needs to see it. And it works really well. So this last gig out in New York was for a music video, and because of the pandemic, it was kind of a unique situation where there was an on-set director as well as a remote director that was on a Zoom call out in France. And so having all of this gear really worked out for this production, because the on-set director used this, the client and the remote director got the feed that was coming out of this. So the biggest difference that I've noticed about using a DJI system on productions versus analog is the reaction. Let me explain. So before on analog, usually any comment that I would get from somebody watching the feed is usually negative. It's just like, why is there noise and static in the video? And it really wasn't until, I would show them the HD footage out of the GoPro where I would get some type of reaction.
Yo, look at that. That's
what?
awesome,
bro. The twist. Yo.
Oh, that was a good shot, or oh my gosh, that's crazy. And with the DJI system, I noticed that the reaction was immediate. So this last gig out in New York was for a music video, and what I had to do was essentially follow the talent through a kitchen as he threw a phone out of the top story of a New York apartment and chase it down into a New York alley as a guy down there grabs it and then runs out of that alley. Pretty complicated and really tight shot. And the first time that I attempted it, you could hear the client in the other room just going ape shit. I mean, he was just going nuts. You could hear him going, "Oh my gosh, this thing is crazy, that's so good." And equally so, the director, who's remote out in France, was just going crazy over the shot.
Oh là 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 là, c'est la chute! Il rattrape le téléphone! Il court le furet! Il passe à droite! Accélère!
And it wasn't just this gig where I've noticed that. The last two gigs that I've used this DJI system on, and I had this monitor out, I noticed that the reactions were immediate. And so it had me wondering, like, I think it's because, I mean, first of all, I think it's because my piloting is just sick, right? But I think that the biggest reason is that when you're watching this on analog, I feel like there's a big level, or I don't know what the right word of it is, but there's a huge chunk.
My apologies. I couldn't hear what you said.
So I think what's going on here is that when you're watching this via analog, an analog signal, I think it's a certain level of it just kind of gets lost in translation. And so for me, this immediate feedback is huge, right? So let me just try to paint the picture a little bit better here. Most of the time, the drone guy on set doesn't, you know, I don't know, maybe I'm looking into this a little too much, but I always feel like the drone guy doesn't get the same, like, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, prestige or respect or whatever as anybody else on the production set until they see your footage. Back on analog, again, there's, you know, I go for the shot, I get some sort of feedback, I don't know how well I'm doing because they're just like, okay, do it like this more, okay, yeah, okay, call it good. And it's not until after I get to show them the HD footage where they're like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. So now, with getting this feedback immediately, I mean, it's just a huge, first of all, it's a huge boost to my ego, which then impacts the rest of my takes immediately because it's not, you know, get this feedback and I don't know if they liked it or not because I'm not really getting a reaction. And so that changes the way you fly afterwards, and each shot after that just gets better. For the director, it almost sparks new ideas and new, like, looks and feels that they want you to go for. And then you got the client that's super stoked and happy, and basically it's like this domino effect of everybody in the production crew getting stoked and excited about the project that they're working on. And I can't help but feel like that can't be anything but a good thing, because now you're the guy that basically brought everybody's, like, excitement level up a couple of notches. Because I was getting a lot of comments about how good it looked and how clear the signal was looking. And I mean, I'm on set with guys with Reds, right? Like, that's not to say that obviously this quality is anything close to a Red, but in my experience, I have never ever gotten immediate reactions like that when I was flying on analog. All that said, there is a downside. This is super, super expensive, especially considering that all you're using it for is just like as an external monitor. Like, it is a full-blown controller. I do have a Mavic, so I could use this with my Mavic and things like that, but I don't use a Mavic on set. I'm usually flying my FPV stuff. I feel like, DJI, if you're listening, I really hope that you guys come out with a standalone solution of like an external monitor for this exact purpose, because I can't help but feel like there's a lot of us that are using the DJI system in professional environments that need that don't want to spend this kind of money. Let me go over the rest of my setup and gear. First of all, as far as settings goes, because I feel like it's really important to have the best quality possible for the client, I do shoot with the 50 megabit mode on, and I also have focus mode off. just because I would rather have them see the best pictures possible. So as far as the rest of my gear goes, I actually use 2 radios. So I have Crossfire, and I'm also using the stock DJI radio. I think I'm probably one of the few, maybe even unpopular opinions, that I actually like this radio. It feels really good in the hand, and it serves most of my needs, especially if you've got like a smaller build where you're really trying to save weight and you don't want to spend a couple of grams on an extra receiver to have Crossfire. And it's really going to depend on your type of flying. Now, the general rule of thumb is that you always want your radio link to outperform your video. You know, in the event that your video goes down, you at least have a fighting chance of saving your aircraft by having your radio. Maybe you've got a return home function. Maybe you can flip it into level mode and just slowly bring down the throttle so that you can just kind of blindly land it. Or maybe you've got line of sight for it, in which case, you know, you've got a fighting chance to fly your aircraft back. And so for that reason, you always want your radio, at least I suggest that you always want your radio link to be better than your video link. Now, for me personally, on a professional level, I always like to have redundancy and have backups. And so I never know, you know, if there's a situation where 900 megahertz is just not going to work whenever I'm out on a professional gig. And so I always have drones that have both systems set up. That way I'm just covered. But I get that this isn't the ideal setup for most people, especially if you're not flying professionally, in which case I would say if you've got the budget for it, then go Crossfire. And if you don't, and you don't really ever see yourself pushing the limits of your radio and or video signal, then go with the stock DJI radio. I really like this radio, actually. And you do lose some functionality in terms of being able to program in OpenTX, but if you don't use any of that stuff, then it doesn't really matter. Or the only need that I have is that on my KISS builds, I want to be able to set up an idle up switch, because I like the ability to turn air mode off and on, for the ability to be able to perch somewhere without it doing that bouncy thing. And so basically, if I do have a KISS build, that will never be on DJI radio. Speaking of, by the way, if you are a KISS person and you don't already know, there is a special firmware on KISS that works with DJI's telemetry. Special shout out to Alexander. I'll link his Patreon down here where you can get that firmware, and it basically makes KISS work with DJI like perfectly. The other reason why I would suggest having Crossfire over the DJI radio is because of the possible use of directional antennas. So these are the X-Airs from TrueRC, and this is what I would use if I find myself in a situation where I need to be able to penetrate a lot of objects for a shot or a flight, in which case that is going to definitely outperform how far you can get with this guy, which then makes Crossfire a no-brainer. This is actually what I use on my goggles. These are the TrueRC Singularity antennas, and what I found with these is that given me a lot more consistency with my signal. What I mean by that is like my numbers, my bitrate, my latency has stayed a lot more consistent than it was on the stock antennas. And the cherry on top, guys, is that like look how short and small these antennas are, and it just really makes it easy to put your stuff in, like, say, this backpack, because the stock antennas are just way too long and I'd have to adjust the room in here to make it all work out. So I couldn't say the same thing about the X-Airs. And while those antennas are absolutely killer for penetration and going the distance, I hated, you know, the hassle of putting them on and taking them off every time I needed to go pack my stuff up. I just got this in from Lumineer, and this is their new AXI HD antenna setup. I was really stoked when Lumineer told me that they are coming out with this guy. And this is their patch antenna. It has a 8 dB gain on it, and it's got a pretty wide 80-degree beam. Pretty confident that as long as you're flying anywhere relatively in front of you, you should be fine, especially since you've got the stubbies that are going to be below. I haven't tried this yet, but just for the simple fact that this was designed by TrueRC in collaboration with Lumineer tells me that I'm probably going to get the performance that I'm looking for. So check these out. I'm really looking forward to using this on my setup moving forward. Again, mainly because I can permanently keep this on my goggles and still have the same portability that I can by not running them, except obviously now I get the best of both worlds. I got the stubbies on the bottom and I get to run these up top. So if you fly DJI and you have a need to be able to send your live feed out, maybe you're doing production work like I am, or maybe you want to start doing like live streaming like your flights or something like that, I think that would be kind of cool. The DJI Smart Controller is the solution for you. Albeit it's a super expensive solution, but it's a solution. And that'll wrap up this video. Alright fellas, I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace out.